I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
It's morphing into a witch hunt.
Always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
Now, if you will, I'd like to read segments of my trial transcript with brief comments that should demonstrate for any rational person the terrible unjust convictions of which I was subject to. The trial took place in the District Court of Western Australia, located in the heart of Perth CBD, between 8 August and 12 August 2011. The first day of trial, being 8 August, had been spent going through the motion of jury selection, listening to the judge explain the so-called rules, pleading to charges, etc., and bringing up the first witness, my stepdaughter, who had alleged the accusations against me under her mother's influence. But for cross-examination, I was not permitted to address the complainant directly. Instead, the judge, in a previous hearing, had ordered me to pre-write a list of questions I might have for the complainant 1 week before trial, which she then had to approve of. This without ever knowing what would actually be said during trial, but you can sure bet the prosecutor read that list and then coached the complainant accordingly. There is evidence to that effect. However, the list of questions that I did prepare could only then be read to the complainant by a court clerk in a linear 1-2-3 fashion. That method provided absolutely no way to rebuke an answer or question deeper into important matters, as was often required. The court clerk would simply read the question, and the complainant would answer yes, no, or I can't remember, and then move on to the next question. It was not, by any definition of the term, a cross-examination. It was insanity. But they had already planned to convict me, so the trial was effectively a dog and pony show for the public and jury. On the following day, the judge allowed me a short period of time to contemplate the answers given from the previous day and to write additional questions for the complainant, which again the judge would have to approve of. I was in no mental frame of mind to even remember what had been said by then. All the vital evidence I had sought to expose for the jury through a natural, lawful cross-examination was, of course, never exposed to the jury. Under immense duress and fatigue from sleepless nights, I struggled desperately to understand the rules of trial proceedings. Throughout that trial, the judge had to repeat the rules over and over, which embarrassed me and caused distraction for the jury. The judge grew more and more impatient with me, causing further embarrassment, which only added to my anxiety. I'll read you now an example of the exchange from the actual trial transcripts. "9 August 2011, Day 2 of the trial. Me. Your Honor, do I only get one question to ask her? Judge. Well, or a series of questions, because it appears it's a different line of questioning, Mr. Ramses, than the ones that were discussed yesterday. Me. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I seem to be at a loss here. I thought I could question her on a lot of things that she had in her statement. Is this my only chance to question her? The Judge. Mr. Ramses, I'll say it again. At that point, the judge begins to re-explain the rules to me, which I simply couldn't get my head around. Some minutes later, I continued, still not understanding. Me. And would I have the opportunity to question her on other matters later separate of this? The judge. No, I have said this already, she chastised. Me. It would be much different if I were actually posing the questions to the complainant in person. In other words, rather than writing my questions and then handing them to a court clerk to read. The judge then asked me if I had any more questions before the trial resumed. I do have one question, I began. Actually, I have 6 for you before we begin. But in this particular matter, am I able to address each issue or question as it comes up? Or, I guess what I'm saying is, when I'm interviewing her, if there comes a point where I need to submit evidence or tell the whole story, would that be an appropriate time to do it? At the end of each statement? Or should I wait for the end of trial? The judge interrupts and says, perhaps I should explain again. The judge explained again to me the rules of evidence and proceedings, and then asked me, do you follow that, Mr. Ramses? To which I replied, yes, I'm just learning through this, but I'm catching on. This was in no way a classroom situation in which to be learning to become a criminal defense lawyer. On the 3rd day of the trial, I was attempting to understand the rules and procedures and terminologies under emotional duress, fatigue, and anxieties. Bouts of angina made it difficult to breathe and speak coherently. Throughout that trial, the judge had to coach or correct me on what to do, which I simply did not understand. I was not a lawyer. By the 3rd day, the damage to my case was well and truly done, and I never had the opportunity to address nor properly exhibit my evidence. What average person could defend themselves in such a situation, much less in a foreign country and foreign court, with absolutely no support or advice? By the afternoon of the 3rd day, my ex-wife had been brought up to testify. In this matter, I was allowed to personally cross-examine her, such as it was. I was already shattered by then, but the defamation and lies she spewed about me to the court further destroyed me. In spite of the divorce, I still had deep feelings for her. In fact, I still loved her. It hadn't been me who wanted the divorce, and I still couldn't grasp that we had divorced at all. I could only ramble, trying to remind her of our time together. Then, I finally suffered a mental and emotional breakdown before the court, and could not complete the vital cross-examination, leaving many facts, in my case, unaddressed. It had all become too much for me, and the transcripts record. And 10 years came to pass, and it was over in 2009. You set me up, bitch, I yelled at my ex-wife. I then began shaking and crying. The judge intervened. Mr. Ramses, you may not, me interrupting the judge, crying. You set me up. Then, through broken breaths, I addressed the judge. Your Honor, I don't know if I can do this. The judge, you may not abuse the witness. Me, I don't want to. I'm innocent. I've got the evidence to prove it, but I don't know how to fucking show it. The judge, Mr. Ramses, please compose yourself. Me, sobbing. I haven't slept for 2 goddamn weeks and she doesn't care. She's got my daughter. I then threw my haphazard stack of documents across the table in the midst of my emotional breakdown. The judge addressed the jury. Members of the jury will take a short break. If you would please retire for a moment. I continued talking, deliriously. She put me in prison, I said, and took my daughter. Then I yelled out, you bastards! I want her back. Then to the judge I said, God, I can't defend myself, Your Honor. Not against this. This was my family. And I haven't slept for weeks preparing for this. And, Your Honor, I don't know what to do now. Everything's been said horrible about me, and it's not true. I had never called my wife such names before, but that breakdown played right into the hands of the prosecutor. In fact, I never should have been put in a situation of having to cross-examine my ex-wife, in the midst of a hard separation and custody battle, and terribly missing my daughter, whom she took from me through false allegations. I should have been given a lawyer. It was far too emotional to face the woman I still had deep feelings for and wonderful memories with. After the jury returned, while still shaking and trying to compose myself, I reiterated for the judge at various times as the trial continued. I can't deal with this. Do you know how fucking hard this is? I haven't slept in a week, and I'm sorry. I know it was all in order, my documents and evidence. I don't know where to go now. This is where I should have dumped it all on the internet. My God, at least someone would see it. I'm innocent. I don't know what to do, Your Honor. I'm not an attorney, and I'm 10,000 miles away from my home and family, and I don't see my daughter, Amy. Then, pointing to the jury, I accused, and these people don't care about my life. I'm sorry for holding up the trial, Your Honor. I never should have felt compelled to apologize for holding up their trial, where my life was on the line. My life. I was 51 years old, and by then, not well, due to the duress and the stress and the heartache I had endured up to that point. But it was in the aftermath of that emotional breakdown, in the afternoon of the third day of trial, that I realized I was reliving the insanity of 1692 Salem. And in that moment, I felt what each and every one of those Salem victims had felt, the sheer terror, the helplessness, the despair, loneliness, and abandonment. Salem's ghost had returned once again. My trial was not a trial by any stretch of the term. It was an inquisition with guilt already predetermined. Naturally, I was inept to the bitter end, as the trial transcript clearly demonstrates, even to the closing address, which I began like this. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm not an eloquent speaker like Mr. Nickel, the prosecutor. And it's true, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a good speaker, as you can tell. But that doesn't mean I'm guilty of anything. I did a search on the internet last night for what a closing address was, and it blew me away. There was no way I could do that. I haven't got the training. I stayed up all night trying to figure out how to write this closing address. I was reading websites. What the fuck is a closing address? I had to learn about trials every step of the way, learning what these guys, the prosecutors, spend years in college to learn before ever walking into a courtroom. Look at him. He's great. He's eloquent. But he's in this to win, not find the truth. Still further demonstrating my lack of understanding of trial matters or closing addresses, I began rambling again, telling the jury of things related to my case, important facts, which I never had a fair opportunity nor the skill to reveal during trial. Apparently, this is not allowed. The prosecutor interrupted me. Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but he's introducing evidence in a closing address. Then the judge chastised me. Mr. Ramses, you've already had your opportunity to give evidence from the witness box. You don't give evidence when you're standing at a bar table making submissions in an argument. What was a bar table? I had wondered. The term conjured images of furniture one might find at a local pub. Moreover, being in the midst of a criminal trial was no place for me, the defendant, at age 51, to be learning through this, but catching on. My life was on the line. For 5 days the trial judge had heard from me. I don't know what to do. I'm not a lawyer. I can't defend myself, Your Honor. I have the evidence but don't know how to show it. Do you know how fucking hard this is? I just don't know where to go now. And, God, I can't defend myself, Your Honor. Not against this. This was my family. For 5 days, the judge observed my struggle to comprehend their outrageous rules, me often speaking incoherently, while I fought emotions, fatigue, heartache, and suffering from angina, all alone. The judge observed my emotional breakdown with seeming indifference. But indifference had been the reaction from all those involved since the onset, from the US Consulate and Ambassador, to lawyers, to legal aid, to the legal and judicial system itself. The judge knew I did not want to face trial without representation. I had stated it in hearing after hearing. The US Consulate and Ambassador certainly knew. But I never should have been put on trial in the first place. They knew I was innocent. I was set up for what I had said on my website, period. But even in the event of a trial, a presiding judge has a duty to assess the circumstances and conditions that might cause the trial to be manifestly unfair, leading to a miscarriage of justice. But this judge deliberately failed to act on those dangers. And despite of such unfair trial conditions, the judge then allowed the trial to conclude in a conviction. It was what they intended all along. I was sentenced to 6.5 years in their prison, the number of years until my precious daughter turned legal adult age. 7 years total, without her father in her life. But that, of course, was what it had all been about, keeping a good father isolated from his child. The story of my time in prison is, well, another story altogether. Much of it will be recounted in Salem's Ghost special segments, called The Prison Years, interwoven among the regular segments such as this one. I was finally released from Acacia Prison and deported to the United States on 31 December 2017, landing in my hometown of Salt Lake City on New Year's Day 2018, after nearly 20 years in the land down under. Yet upon my return home, I was to learn that the terrible injustices against a U.S. citizen that I had suffered and endured at the hands of the Australian government and judicial body would still continue, even in my home country, and most assuredly in violation of my constitutional rights. While in prison, I had suffered a near-fatal heart attack and subsequent aneurysm that caused a steady decline in my health, while adversely affecting my memory and balance and overall well-being. Prior to arrest, that is, prior to that horrible ordeal, I had been a strong, alert, healthy 50-year-old man and father. They did this to me just to keep a father from his daughter. The shock of being free again after years in isolation compounded those physical and mental problems. For a year afterwards, I struggled to reassimilate back into some semblance of life as I knew it. I had no mentoring or coaching in that matter. None was available. My beloved, now aging parents provided what they could, and I thank them dearly for it. Nonetheless, I was now facing homelessness in the dead of winter in my own hometown. My family had all been told by authorities not to let me come home. Clearly, humanity is in trouble. There is no doubt in my mind that it is as much a spiritual war as it is likely to become a physical war. And I've seen the ugliness in human beings, and they weren't all in prison, but instead right in front of us, on our TV, in our courts, corporations, our Senate and parliaments, our schools and universities, and in our neighborhoods. And sometimes they manifest in the person or people you loved and trusted the most. But we need to fight it, and we need to fight it hard. The alternative is unspeakable. I would be interested in knowing whether you, the viewer, believe that the trial I was subjected to in Western Australia, under the conditions of that trial, was, in your opinion, fair and just. I suppose I'm curious to see just how far Western societies have fallen in this new era of weaponized accusations. All the way back to 1692, perhaps. Or are there still enough good, moral, decent people remaining to offer significant hope for our troubled future? I pray so, for our children and grandchildren's sake, where 1692 will become the norm for the next 400 years. I am John Victor Ramses. I didn't become a victim of a false allegation when it happened to me. I became another recruit in the war against it. Please share, comment, like, or dislike, but by all means subscribe, especially if you are an American or Australian. There's a lot more coming that you might need to know about. And I'm searching for my daughter still, who never knew the truth of what happened to her daddy. If you know my daughter, tell her I love her and that I never left her. Her daddy was taken. Thanks for watching Salem's Ghost.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed.
Is morphing into a witch hunt.